For today's daily devotion, we're getting into Deuteronomy chapter 2. If you've been joining us, you know this already, but just in case you haven't noticed already, there's a lot of names in Deuteronomy. And so one of the ways that I've been found really helpful in just navigating the names, especially of the place names, is to use openbible.info/geo. I've linked it in the description of the YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube. That's a great place to go to navigate all these different places that are mentioned. It actually pulls up a map for the chapter that you're studying, and it gives you sort of pinpoints on the map and says, here's where this place is and what verse is mentioned in. And so if you want to kind of geographically follow the story or hear the places that Moses is talking about in these sections, I'd encourage you to do that. Particularly in this section of Deuteronomy chapter 2, there's just a whole bunch of names, and there's actually some real significance in the names, which I hope to show you. But this is one of those sections where I really love to talk about it because it's a section that you can easily read over and say, like, I don't understand why that's in the Bible. I'm not sure why that's spiritually helpful for me. And I want to show you that actually it's sections like these that can be really rich. I think of, for example, the genealogies of Jesus at the beginning of the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. These things are really important for just helping us understand some big picture things about God's grace. So I hope to show those to you here in Deuteronomy chapter 2. So we're going to read the first 23 verses. I encourage you to follow along with the text in the description of the YouTube video or in the description of the podcast, or open another tab if you need to follow along. It's obviously a lot of text, so stick with me, follow along, and we'll show how this big section of text teaches us about God's grace. Moses says, "Then we turned back and set out toward the wilderness along the route to the Red Sea, as the Lord had directed me. For a long time we made our way around the hill country of Seir. Then the Lord said to me, 'You have made your way around this hill country long enough. Now turn north. Give the people these orders. You are to pass through the territory of your relatives, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. They will be afraid of you, but be very careful. Do not provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land, not even enough to put your foot on. I have given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own. You are to pay them in silver for the food you eat and the water you drink. The Lord your God has blessed you in all the work of your hands. He has watched over your journey through this vast wilderness. These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you, and you have not lacked anything.' So we went on past our relatives, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. We turned from the Arabah road, which comes up from Elath and Ezion Geber, and traveled along the desert road to Moab. Then the Lord said to me, 'Do not harass the Moabites or provoke them to war, for I will not give you any part of their land. I have given Ar to the descendants of Lot as a possession.' The Emites used to live there, a people strong and numerous and as tall as the Anakites. Like the Anakites, they too were considered Rephaites, but the Moabites called them Emites. Horites used to live in Seir, but the descendants of Esau drove them out. They destroyed the Horites from before them and settled in their place, just as Israel did in the land the Lord gave them as their possession. And the Lord said, 'Now get up and cross the Zered Valley.' So we crossed the valley. 38 years passed from the time we left Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the Zered Valley. By then the entire generation of fighting men had perished from the camp, as the Lord had sworn to them. The Lord's hand was against them until he had completely eliminated them from the camp. Now when the last of these fighting men among the people had died, the Lord said to me, 'Today you are to pass by the region of Moab at Ar. When you come to the Ammonites, do not harass them or provoke them to war, for I will not give you possession of any land belonging to the Ammonites. I have given it as a possession to the descendants of Lot.' That too was considered a land of the Rephaites, who used to live there, but the Ammonites called them Zamzummites, which is like the coolest name in this whole text. They were a people strong and numerous, and as tall as the Anakites. The Lord destroyed them from before the Ammonites, who drove them out and settled in their place. The Lord had done the same for the descendants of Esau who lived in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites from before them. They drove them out, and have lived in their place to this day. And as for the Avvites, who lived in villages as far as Gaza, the Caphtorites, coming out of Caphtor, destroyed them and settled in their place." This is God's word. So, like I said, it's a tough text with a lot of names in it. And first of all, I just want to give you an encouragement. If you're reading these books of the Bible and you are not sure how to pronounce these words, don't worry, most people aren't. And even most scholars don't really have a absolute understanding of how to pronounce these words. They just say, we kind of know what the letters look like, but we don't really know because no one speaks that language, those names, anymore. And so what we have is the words on the paper and we know what the letters are, but how we pronounce them it's kind of up to the artist's interpretation, if you will. So when you read those things, don't let anybody look down on you because you pronounce a word a certain way. In fact, if it were me, I would just think up weird ways to say the names just to annoy people, because that's the kind of person I am. All right, so what's happening in this text? So Moses starts out with the people back towards the Red Sea. So they're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And obviously, that's a long time. And I think we just ought to realize, we just say 40 years, but think about 40 years. I'm not even 40 years old. Some of you are not even 40 years old. That's the entire existence of some people's lives. And it's just spent wandering in the wilderness. They're doing nothing. It gives you a little bit of perspective when you feel like God's not really doing anything in your life, or He's not moving like you hope he would. God might wait 40 years to actually make you do something. Moses is a perfect example of this, by the way. Moses' life is really cool in that he has all of the resources, all of the energy, all of the passion, all of the skills when he's in his 20s and 30s. But God doesn't use him until he's spent decades as a shepherd out in the wilderness, until he's 80 years old. He's 80 years old when he uses him to get the Israelites out of Egypt. So just think about that. As a 30-year-old, sometimes I think now's the time. I got to make it happen. And God with Moses, who in many ways was more skilled, more resourced than me at 30 years old, God made him wait until he was 80 till he actually did something really cool with him. Maybe I have to wait until I'm 80 till God does something really cool with me. So there's three kind of moves here. The people move past the people of Edom, Esau's descendants, and then Ammon and Moab. And God says essentially the same thing to each of them in each place, right? I'm not going to give you this land, so pass through or pass by. Pay for what you eat or drink, but don't attack them, don't provoke them. And so why does he do this? So the big thing to understand is the connection of these three nations to Israel. So Israel, of course, comes from Jacob, right? Jacob's name is changed to Israel. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob is Israel. Jacob's brother, Esau, is the nation of Edom. So there's the connection there that Edom and Israel are brothers in a way, brother nations. Ammon and Moab are the descendants of the two daughters of Lot who had sex with Lot. I know it's terrible, but they had sex with Lot. They got him drunk. One went in one night, one went in the next night. They had babies by him. Those lineages where Lot was both father and grandfather to the boys that were born, they became the nations of Moab and Ammon. And so what's really interesting about this is that God is not just singularly focused on Israel. I think it's easy to read the scriptures and think this is the story of Israel. Well, it's not really. It's the story of the Messiah and his lineage coming to fruition in the person of Jesus Christ. And Israel happens to be the main character in the story, but really it's all about getting Jesus. And also, we should understand that God is much bigger than just caring about Israel. Yes, we see God's action in Israel more than anything else through the scriptures, but God is active in the other nations, and he does this by his grace. Now, we see here three nations, three that come out of really bad places, right? So Esau, of course, throws away his birthright, but God still gives him a nation, still makes him a people, still gives him a land, and still takes care of him and his descendants, right? Ammon and Moab come from an incestuous relationship from the nephew of Abraham, Lot, and yet God still takes care of their nation, provides for them, gives them a place to live, and protects them, not just from Israel, but from other nations. And there's actually a really cool place, and I'll see if I can turn here really quickly to it. But in the Minor Prophets, in the book of Amos, Hosea, Joel, Amos. That's how the books of the Bible go. In Amos chapter 9, there's this really cool verse where Amos is prophesying for God, and God says, chapter 9, verse 7, it says, Are not you Israelites the same to me as the Cushites? So Cushites would have been like Ethiopians in Africa, declares the Lord. Did I not bring Israel up from Egypt, and the Philistines up from Caphtor, you heard that name in the text, and the Arameans from Kir? So what God is telling us right here is that God's relationship with other nations, not just Israel, is also one of grace and providence and watching over them. And that's really cool for us to remember too, that on the one hand, we do have a very singular focused God who knows your name because he baptized you and he watches over your life and makes things work for your good. But God is also a God of the entire world. And while he is guiding your life and your church and your family, he is also guiding all of the actions all around you in nations and places with people that you will never meet, so that it all works for your good and for the good of his church. He does all that by his grace, too. This is something that obviously Ammon and Moab do not deserve. Neither does Israel, for that matter, and neither does Edom. But God still provides that. Another interesting thing here is just, the list of names. And again, this sort of testifies to the validity of the scripture that Moses chooses to name all these places, and many of these places we can actually find using archaeological digs and that sort of stuff. The more details you provide, the more likely you are to be proven wrong, and Moses provides a whole bunch of details here, and names and places and all sorts of things like that. So that's as far as we're going to go for today. I just want to remind you of the grace that God shows to people who have messed up in life. Even if they don't seem like they're the main characters in God's story, they're not the ones who are on the screens as preachers or doing big things in their business or having great families. God is watching out for every single person. That includes you. And he gives you the grace of first the forgiveness of sins and then the purpose of being used in his kingdom. And I pray that that works deep into your heart today as you think through your day. And I pray that you come back for another daily devotion sometime soon. I'll catch you then.